Hey guys, Scott here. I was looking at the Elden Ring store page and checked the Shadow of the Erdtree review section, and to my surprise, it was mixed. Now, considering this is one of the best DLCs I've ever played in my entire life, to see this as mixed was very, very confusing, so I wanted to go and see what the actual complaints are. Now, I feel like a lot of them are about difficulty, because a lot of people, this is their first FromSoft DLC. Elden Ring brought a lot of new people into this community, and they have not tackled with a new FromSoft DLC. They are always extremely hard and notably harder than the base game. That's just pretty much how it's always been. All of the hardest bosses from all of the Souls games are always from the DLCs that they get. So if it's about difficulty, I'm going to attribute this to just people simply not knowing how FromSoft DLC works and jumping in with a level of expectations and then getting stomped on a bunch because it wasn't quite what they were expecting. For other things like tech issues and stuff like that, well, let's just go into it. I just want to read exactly what people are having issues with here and see if they're legitimate or not, and see if we need to drop a get good or not. I really don't want to do that because, it's a very obnoxious thing the Souls community does quite a bit. A boss is too hard and people just say get good instead of, what's your actual issue with it? Do you have any, good designs that you would do instead of what they currently do? Let's try to make this a bit more of a constructive conversation, but if someone is like game poopy bad, then I'm gonna say get good. But we'll start with, I don't know, let's just read a couple and see what we see. So the first one is about performance. FPS is capped to 60. It's been the same thing since it came out. Still no ultra wide support. It's been the same thing since it came out. No AI frame generation. That's been the same thing since it doesn't. It just seems like this is just the base game of Elden Ring on PC. It's not like it's gotten worse. Yeah, it still doesn't have these notable modern features, and it probably should, but I think it's weird to positively rate a game and then a DLC comes out for it, nothing changes, but now it's bad because they didn't improve things that you wanted to improve. I don't know, that just seems weird to me. But if I can offer some advice, if you're getting dips in a 50 FPS, I can almost guarantee it's because you didn't realize that ray tracing was enabled and you probably came back to the game for the first time. Ray tracing was enabled by default, maybe like a year ago or something. I had this exact same issue on PC. My game was running like garbage until I turned off ray tracing and I was back to smooth 60 FPS, does not drop a single time. So if you're having issues like that and that's why you're writing a bad review, please disable ray tracing. It eats up your entire processing power and it doesn't really do much of anything. So that is the main culprit there, and I bet all of your problems here are honestly just going to go away. So let's go into more difficulty. World design and colors are really beautiful. A lot of enemy designs is a big problem with balancing. Right now, even with 60 vigor, you get bi-shotted by nearly every enemy that's not pure fodder. I'm guessing he means like getting two-shotted there. Like the classical wandering nobles in the base game. And the scatter two fragments that should make your damage and defense increase exclusively in the DLC don't help that much, and are mostly locked behind bosses. Well, that's just not true. I think you can get 8 upgrade levels without fighting a single boss. Even if you're stuck on a boss like Rolana, you might not even realize that Rolana is an optional boss for the DLC. You don't have to fight her. In fact, half of the bosses in the DLC are completely optional. The Dancing Lion, completely optional. You don't have to fight all these bosses that people are really hitting a wall with. And I think that's the funniest part. You're subjecting yourself to something you're either not prepared for or just simply don't even need to have to do. And I just kind of find that a little humorous. But for the upgrade levels, no. You can get to about +8 upgrade levels before you fight a single boss, which will put you well ahead of the curve of where damage scaling is supposed to be. So I don't really think that's a good example. You just kind of haven't really explored more, and you probably just beelined it directly to Rolana or something like that. And we're like, wow, this shit's hard. And to be fair, at my first playthrough on the review copy, that's exactly what I do. And I was like, wow, this shit's hard. But I knew what I signed up for. I knew I didn't explore, so I didn't complain about it being the game's fault. I was like, oh, I could have explored more, and that would have made this whole thing a lot easier. An example. And the first boss you fight is the Divine Beast Dancing Lion. It can be. I wouldn't recommend that, but sure, it can be. It obviously has a lot of health and bi-shots you with nearly everything, but other than that, its first phase is pretty doable, gives you enough windows to do some nice damage, the moves are well telegraphed and the dodgeable, and the design is cool. Then comes the second phase, where he starts floating around and attacking you with his big dashes and shooting enormous lightning AoEs that deal a ton of damage. And all of that keeps going forever with few windows for damage, nearly 0 for slow weapons sometimes, and the bosses later on only get crazier to a degree that I think might be excessive. So I didn't find a single boss. My first playthrough was an 80 strength Giga Chad with a Great Axe. I just did that the entire playthrough. I didn't find a single boss other than maybe the last boss where I didn't always have a clear window to not only attack but to do a charged R2 that would do 3,000 damage. So you do have to wait for these windows. If you're using a slow weapon, you can't just be like jumping in and trading with a lot of these combos because they'll probably outdamage you, especially if you don't have the upgrade levels for it. But I found pretty much every single boss in the game, other than the last one, offered me an opportunity to do a charged R2. You just have to wait for the opportunity, and some people might find that wait to not be fun, and if that's a genuine criticism that you have, that's okay. I wouldn't really argue with that. But it's not that there's no opportunity to do it. There are plenty of them. You just need to look out for them and learn the boss's moveset while that's happening. So I get the frustration there. And I do think it's a shame that the Divine Beast Dancing Lion is one of the first bosses you can fight, because it's probably one of the weakest in the DLC. And I see a lot of people basing their reviews off of them rushing Bellarat, and then that's their first boss. And if that's your actual experience, that's probably going to be bad. Now, that's what my first experience was, but again, I knew what I signed up for. I didn't have enough upgrade levels. I knew I was going to have not a great time, and so it took me about an hour, where it probably should have taken me 20 minutes if I was properly prepared for it. But I understand that. I will say that fight has a wonky camera if you try to auto-target onto him, to the point where I actually started unlocking, and that made it a lot easier. But that's pretty much the only boss, maybe other than like other one or two attacks from some other bosses, where the camera was just all over the place. So that I understand, but I wish people wouldn't attribute the entire DLC to literally that first boss that has this issue, because very few other bosses in the game actually do have that. So it's a real shame that that's where you stopped. You went to your first boss and decided to make your review there. I feel like you should have to, play a bit more before you can make a review, but it's a Steam review. Doesn't really mean much of anything, but yeah, it just seems like they didn't explore enough with the whole Scatter Tree fragments. You can get plenty of upgrades before your first boss. So that is, I think, an exploration issue, not really a skill issue or anything like that. But hopefully they do update the review later when they realize that it's kind of up to them a little bit. Another negative review. The good. Jaw-dropping beautiful worlds. Well, we don't care about the good. We already know the good. The bad. Recycled bosses. Get ready for 5 more copy-pasted giant dragons in the first couple hours, and major bosses have straight-up recycles from the base game. Let me analyze this sentence more. From what I found, there are 3 Ghost Flame dragons. Ghost Flame dragons are largely just the dragons you see in a regular Elden Ring. They have mostly the same moveset with like 1 or 2 new attacks. They're basically there just to give you dragon hearts to cast new dragon communion spells. That's the only reason they exist. They don't even really need boss bars because you fought them so many times. And I agree, they do overuse these enemies quite a bit. The thing is, though, who cares? It doesn't remove anything from the game. They're just sitting in a field. Just go around them. You don't have to fight them if you're not trying to get their, the dragon heart to cast spells that they use and things like that. They are completely optional, not in the way of anything. I always think if something is not super good, but you don't ever have to engage with it whatsoever, then it's not really that big of a complaint. Because if the game has 70 billion things to do, but the 699th billion thing is pretty boring because it's a repeat, well, okay, whatever, I don't care. I'll just look at that dragon and go, oh, good, one of those guys, and keep going on my merry way to the 7 billion miles of square foot that I have to... Why didn't I just say square miles? But there's plenty of stuff to do without seeing, the recycled dragons, for example. Now, this comment here, major bosses have straight-up recycles from the base game. This sort of leans into a bit spoiler territory, so if you don't want to hear anything like that, then probably stop watching right now. I'll give you a second. So there are bosses, there is a boss in the game that reuses a known character from Elden Ring. And that's it. They reuse the model of the character. Their moveset is entirely different. Their phases are entirely different. Everything they do is entirely different, except the visual appearance and lore of that character being fought again. That's it. I don't think it's fair to say major bosses have straight up recycles. It's one thing that shares the model, and it makes sense why it shares the model. So I don't think that's a really good complaint, because nothing else in the game does that. So terrible camera. Terrible camera is the Dancing Beast, the lion. I agree, the camera is pretty annoying there. It actually does very much remind me of the tree spirits. That's a very good comparison. So again, I think people are making their reviews here of the first boss and then going, well, I'm guessing everything else in the DLC is like this, which is a shame the first boss has that issue, because I can't think of any other one, again, other than maybe like 1 out of 40 that does have that issue. But it's a shame that the people are attributing the entire DLC to that one boss. So that is unfortunate. Terrible collision hitbox. It's this dice roll if you're about to get ragdolled across the arena when 1 pixel of a boss's epileptic ass cheek brushes against you. And even at 60 vigor, it'll take out 60% of your health. Yeah, I didn't really have an issue with any grabs. I'd say the only grab I had an issue with is the giant furnace golems. They have this one grab where they can basically one-shot you if they grab you. But the key there is you just go behind them. They just only grab in front of them. So that's it. That was an issue for 5 minutes. But other than that, I didn't really find any bullshit grabs in the entire DLC. So again, just because I'm saying this doesn't mean it's correct. Just because they're saying this doesn't mean it's correct. I'm just offering my personal experiences based off of what I did after 3 separate playthroughs. So what else we got? As far as combat goes, there's a lot of poise monsters. If anyone remembers the Dragon Shrine Knights from Dark Souls 2 before they were patched. Oh my god, in the Dragon area or whatever. Or right after the Dragon area. God, those guys were tanks. Crazy HP pool enemies, infinite stamina, infinite poise. It's like they took Erdtree and cranked it up to 1510. Yeah, to me this was to be expected. We're going to get tankier enemies. We're going to get enemies that are harder to stagger. So it depends on the weapons that you're using. If you're using anything smaller than like a greatsword, if you're using like a straight sword or daggers or things like that, yeah, you're going to find a lot of enemies that are very, very hard to interrupt. And so the gameplay style changes there to you need to punch them a bit, roll, punch them a bit, roll, punch them a bit, roll, and it can take a lot longer. So my strength playthrough and my faith strength playthrough, I just had a big fuck off hammer, and whatever I hit got staggered. I honestly didn't even have to interact with any of the mechanics that any of them had. I would open with a jump attack, go into a follow-up R1, they would get staggered, I'd crit them and they would die. These are even the high-level Fire Knights that have, 15,000 health. It was extremely trivial with higher stagger. Now, is that good design that only those things stagger? Well, the thing is, even like great swords and great spears will stagger on 2 of those attacks. So it really just depends on the speed of the weapon and adjusting your playstyle to the weapon that you're currently using. I can't swing and then immediately roll away when I'm swinging a giant hammer. When I do that, I'm going to get hit in the face by 5 other things that are attacking me. If you've got, very quick weapons like backhand blade or something, you can go and then just roll away somewhere else before they even begin the next swing in their combo. So you got to really play to your build strengths, not go for staggers if you've got light weapons, and only go for staggers if you've got heavy weapons. That's just sort of how the builds work. That's how the entire game is built, and there are going to be certain enemies and bosses that are much easier for quick characters and certain enemies and bosses that are much harder for, big strength characters. And trust me, there's a lot of them where I was struggling to find an opportunity to even hit a jump attack or something. So it's definitely hard, but you got to find which bosses cater to the build that you're using, and some are going to be easier and some are going to be harder. Crazy HP pool. Several new enemy types, spam attacks nonstop. Yeah, that's not new, though. That's been happening since, the first bosses of Elden Ring. Look, love it or hate it, Elden Ring has a very, very more aggressive style of boss and enemy, where it's basically they can go on, 6-7 hit attack chains, and then they wear themselves out, and then that's when you get your hit in and stuff like that. Nothing's really changed here. That's sort of how it still is. And I don't really hate or like that. That's just how the game is. That's how Elden Ring is built. So I'm not sure why you'd have a problem with this in the DLC when that's how the base game is too. I mean, if you're talking about holding attacks, there's an attack where Margit, the first boss you fight, holds this shit over his head for 6 seconds. It's almost comical how long he holds it over his head. But that's just how it is. That's the whole thing is you can roll so much now and be so aggressive, but in doing so, the bosses can also do that. And the whole point is now you need to have your rolls not be panic rolls anymore. This is a game that punishes your panic rolls heavily. You need to be rolling on reaction to the things happening on your screen, not just because you want to get caught with iframes as you're just mashing the button. So I ended up really liking that style because you have to perfectly learn a moveset and you can't really cheese it like that. You have to actually know exactly when to roll, and I think that is overall a good thing. Perhaps a new upgrade system will smooth this out once characters obtain more shards. That is true. That's the whole point of it. Maybe you went the wrong route, but so far you're finding many trash mobs take 4 to 8 hits, and larger mobs feel power enough to be full-on mini-bosses. Mind you, I'm at New Game and level 200 running a very optimized build. Heard New Game Plus is awful. For now, if you found the base Elden Ring enjoyable, but boarding on too difficult for you, especially the late game, you're probably not going to love what's on here. That's fair. I think that's a perfectly fair criticism. If you did not like the late game scaling of enemies like in Farum Azula, for Elden Ring, then you won't like this because it's just that and then more and more. You can start growing more and more powerful as well. Once you get 15 of these fragments, your weapons have 1900 attack rating. It starts getting ridiculous. So you definitely start getting way, way stronger as well. But it's definitely more of the same of the high level difficulty. So that's completely fair. If your complaint is, I didn't like the higher end enemies in the Erdtree and things like that, then yeah, you're not going to like this and I wouldn't recommend you buy it. I just don't know why you would buy this expecting anything else unless you've never heard of any other FromSoft DLC. This is what they've done every single time. Every DLC they make has the strongest enemies in the entire game every single time. So this is nothing new, and I guess it's just people new to the Elden Ring community or the Souls community in general. What is this weather in my backdrop? It's like, what is this fucking... What do I live in, like, downtown, like, Detroit? What is this? This is awful. I can't even see... Whatever. So this is just what they do, and if you weren't aware of that, that sucks. But this is just how FromSoft DLCs are. They're significantly harder than the main game, and that's just how it is. What else we got? Gameplay makes the game hard to recommend. Spastic bosses with jerky roll catch movements and a plethora of physical, nonsensical moves that makes the bosses of the DLC hard to put up with. That just sounds like Elden Ring. That's literally spastic bosses with jerky roll catch movements. That's literally Elden Ring. That's just every fucking boss in Elden Ring is that. So I don't know why that's striking you as different or anything like that, but the whole game is built around awkward roll catches and a bunch of crazy movements and all that stuff. That's literally what the game is. Again, if you don't like that, that's fine. But why would you buy the DLC if you didn't like that? That's just the base of the game itself. So I don't know. Let's read on a bit more here. I'm not making mistakes because your reflexes are weak, but because you can't see what's happening. Enemy movements are specifically designed to not make sense to make the fights more difficult. Apparently, rolling when the enemy swings his sword is not good enough. Now you have to memorize how much delay there is between each specific sword swing in the combo. Yeah, that's how Elden Ring works. Literally, the first boss, Margit, teaches you specifically to not panic roll. That is the whole point of the game. Yeah, the boss is readying their sword, but you need to see, is he readying it for the slow attack? Is he readying it for the fast attack? Is he going to hold it? That's the whole point. The whole point is stopping you from panic rolling as soon as you see the boss move their arm in some way. No, you need to know which attack that boss is using, and then you need to know the delay behind that. And when we do get to that scenario, it almost approaches a Sekiro-like level of like you're doing a dance with the boss. There is a boss in the DLC, he is in a Frenzied Flame area, I'll just say that, who has moves that are basically just like a dance. And once you learn it, he has like flowing combos that, oh, this one's got a delay, this one comes out really fast, this one's a delay, this one's fast. And once you learn that combo, you feel like you're doing a dance with the boss. And that's the whole point. That's the beautiful point of doing all this. That feels great. So I think they want to chase that Sekiro high where you start like dancing with the boss. And that's great design in my opinion. I in fact love that. I see that as a really, really good thing. So I want more of that. It's frustrating getting your ass beat 30 times until you learn the dance, but once you do, it just feels perfect. I think Godfrey is another even more tame and fair version of that a lot of people really enjoy the Godfrey fight, because again, it feels like you're doing a dance with him. He's doing his triple axe swing, you're rolling under the two of them, he winds up for the final one, you hit him there, you roll like... When you get that going, it just feels great, and a lot of the bosses of this DLC are exactly that. You do need to learn the timings. For example, Mesmer has a couple of attacks where he hangs in the air, but he hangs in the air at different times depending on the attacks, and you need to remember which attack preceded that to learn how long he's going to stay in the air. So again, a lot of the game is like that, but I see that as a plus. I enjoy learning the exact timings of their moveset. And if you don't like that, I'm not sure why you liked Elden Ring, because that is the entire game is just based on that. Performance is ass. Can't expect 30 FPS. Turn off ray tracing. This is hating a lot of people, and I wish it wasn't on by default. Bad move by FromSoft. Turn off ray tracing. It'll fix everything. The bosses in the DLC are unbearably pathetic. I miss a time when the Soulsborne games were about understanding the bosses, using their weaknesses against them, and overcoming them by skill and knowledge. It's still like that. Now it's just 10 hit combos where every attack also does the second AoE attack that makes it completely confusing when to dodge. So they always have the same moves. They're not AI-generated enemies that are adapting to your movements. They have the same moves every single time. You just need to learn when at the end of that 10-hit combo you can actually swing. Because sometimes they'll do a 6-hit combo and they'll linger a bit and the animation's subtle. And maybe you don't notice that, at which point it's a skill issue. But actually, the animation's subtle because this time he's holding it and he's going to go into 2 more swings and stuff like that. That's the stuff you need to be analyzing and looking at. And again, that's how the base game of Elden Ring is. That's why I think it's fun. Now, if you don't like that, again, it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means you don't like that, which is fine. It's just because I like it doesn't mean it's good. If anything, you should just not offer an opinion on it whatsoever, because it's just not something you like to begin with, and you just tried to purchase more of it, which I don't really understand. Bosses that nuke you the second you get into the arena. Okay, this one is a valid complaint. There are several bosses that don't even give you time to drink a flask or summon a tear of some kind, or a spirit ash if you want to, because they will just ass ram you within a second of you entering that fog. So you actually, if you do want to summon spirit ashes, you actually have to fight them for a second and roll away and then summon it. I'll agree that's weird design. If you want to give people, the handicap of using spirit ashes, I don't even mean that as an insult, by the way. I spirit ashed on the final boss. I couldn't take it anymore. But if you want to give them that, you need to give them a window to actually fucking summon the thing. That was annoying in a couple of bosses, so I completely agree with that as a criticism. Dark Souls was hard because it was punishing. Elden Ring is hard because you need ADHD to dodge 50% of those attacks. Luckily, the game is so badly balanced, you could just spam ashes for it and win the DPS race. I mean, there's a little bit of truth in that. You can make some absolutely cracked builds and do billions of damage, but I don't think you need ADHD to dodge 50% of these attacks. I'm a 34-year-old that's basically boomer in gamer terms, and I was just fine, so mild skill issue. Somehow worse than Ashes of Ariandel. Fucking what? Hoping for a balanced patch that makes this even slightly more bearable. I don't know. People are defending this. The whole Shadow Realm system is flawed and shouldn't exist. Say you're in the end game. A boss is dealing 80% of your 60 vigor health bar in one hit. Then when you go to your stat screen, you realize you have 70% absorptions against all attacks. The boss just deals that much damage. You're also only tickling him, but you have 1100 AR. The boss is just that tanky. With how blessings are right now, they're required unless you have having to no-hit bosses for 30 minutes is a crazy idea. What if the blessings didn't exist and the bosses were just balanced instead? Here's the reason. The reason they did that system is because they wanted people to have a sense of progression. If you go into the DLC at level 200, you're going to kill 3 bosses and level up 1 time. That's not really going to feel that great. So they want people to feel like they're getting stronger as the DLC progresses, and I agree with them. It would be really lame from the start of the DLC to the end of the DLC to have gained 4 levels. Ooh. That's a huge sense of character accomplishment I've gotten here. No, these levels, these upgrades, when you start getting a lot, you feel way stronger. Seriously, I look at my AR and my attack rating with my two-handed weapon, and I started at like 950, and it's at like 1900 now. So I'm doing like almost double damage just by picking these things up, and I'm also taking way less damage. So they are a pretty required thing in the game. Look at it this way. If you just immediately rush to Rolana, one of the first bosses you can fight, with 0 upgrades, you're going to have a rough time. You can do it, it's just going to be hard. It's in the same sense, if you go with your +0 longsword from the Vagabond and beeline it to Margit, you're going to have a rough time until you learn about Square Off, but you're going to have a rough time. You don't have any seed upgrades, you don't have any sacred tears, you don't have your physic, you don't have anything. You don't have anything that's going to make these things easier, and so I'm going to offer the same exact advice I did back then. If you hit a wall like that, go somewhere else. Like I said, Rolana is not even a required boss. You can just never fight her and still beat the game. There are so many things you can get just from exploring that will make you have significantly higher upgrades, and things will feel better. And again, they're trying to replicate the same experience from the base game, where if you rush Margit with nothing, you're going to feel like shit. If you rush Rolana, you're going to feel like shit. That's just how it is, and I think that's honestly pretty good design. They want you to have that sense of exploration and wonder and not just beeline it through the story in 5 hours again. So that's, I think, good in my opinion. Again, all this is ignoring the last boss, who I think is actually too hard. I'm still sticking with my guns there. The last boss is too hard. I just fought them again last night, and they were just... It's just too much. It's just overtuned. Then there's the quadruple NPC gank that instant rots you with huge AoE rot pots. So this guy actually did get through a lot of the DLC, I will admit. This is like the second to last fight. Instant rots you with a huge AoE rot pots, and sometimes even if you dodge, a literal one-shot soul mass attack. Fist attacks that are basically... Okay, I know exactly which fight this guy is talking about. And on my first playthrough, I agreed with him. I thought this fight was really stupid. Turns out, I don't want to spoil anything. Turns out, if you do NPC quest lines in the DLC, this fight becomes an absolute joke. So this is basically the punishment for rushing through the whole game in 5 hours. And again, I don't want to spoil anything, but yeah, if you just directly rush through the main story and go right to the final boss, then this fight is miserable. I agree. But in my second playthrough, I took my time, I interacted with NPCs, I did their quests. The fight becomes a complete joke, and it's nothing. So I would have to say maybe you should have explored more, and maybe you're being punished for rushing too hard into stuff, just as I was. But I didn't fault the game for that. I faulted myself for that. That's not really the game's fault. That's sort of your fault for ignoring everything and just going right towards the end. Because, yeah, you are not going to have nearly as bad of a time if you do NPC quests, and I'll just leave it at that. I hope the person that did the balance will be fired. Based. I really want to like the DLC, but these enemies and boss fights are the worst parts of the whole game. I'm genuinely surprised whoever playtested the approved Golden Hippo boss fight. I had no issues with that fight whatsoever. I think it took me like 7 or 8 tries. That's just a random late game mob. That wasn't hard at all. No matter what, people are going to point to negative reviews and say fake gamer thinks the game's so hard. Again, I don't want to do that, so that's a valid complaint. Playing Souls games since 2012, 5,000 hours. Okay, very experienced person. Shadow of the Erdtree is lacking in fundamental design principles in a way that exacerbates Elden Ring's most egregious issues and creates some of its own on top. This man seems like he's well-spoken. Let's dive in. Encounter design. Some of the enemy encounter design in the DLC is reminiscent of what people railed on Lords of the Fallen for. There are several points in the DLC where FromSoft has placed enemies in nooks and around corners with the sole purpose of trying to cheese you and knock you off a ledge. Has this always been present in every Souls game as a means to encourage players to be cautious? Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Have they taken it to a ridiculous extreme this time around? Yes. I don't think it was a ridiculous extreme. There's definitely little shits around corners and things like that, but that's the point of signs on the ground. You'll see a sign, be wary of right, and then you're going to be ready for that stuff. Yeah, they definitely scatter that around there. I don't find that they do that more than in any other Souls game, but that's a Soul staple. But at that point, you round a corner, a skeleton kicks you off a cliff. That's just Souls. That's been there since Demon Souls even. So that is a classic FromSoft thing. I didn't find it that there were so many more of them that it was ridiculous, but that's classic design there. Character and world scaling. After playing some of the DLC, I've really started to believe that FromSoft started this project without really having an idea of where and when the DLC was going to exist. There are dozens of incredibly confusing points where you might reach the end of a legacy dungeon, go through several tricky enemies, open up a secret corridor, and see a shiny only to realize that it's the Somber Smithing Stone 1. It's the earliest weapon upgrade you can get and completely useless at this point in the game. I will agree with that. There are a couple of times where you see an item on a ledge and you find out how to get there after 5 minutes and it's just like, I don't know, a dew-kissed herba or like a random crafting material. You're just like, what? Really? So that's fair. For example, there's an ancient dragon Somberstone just prior to Mohg's boss room, which is required to even access the DLC. You might enter a mine and find a mix of smithing stones 2 and 3, and enemies drop smithing stones 4, all of which is completely outclassed and is easily purchasable by anyone who's made it to Altus Plateau. That is true. I have found a lot of upgrade materials that are just simply lower than what you are supposed to be relative strength-wise. It's not like they take away from anything else. It's just when you go into a mine and you pick up things, you're expecting to pick up late game stuff. But technically, if you're upgrading your weapons, you still do need the earlier stuff too. It's not like you start your weapons at +6 and then go to +25. They start at +1, so you still need these early grain items. And that it's kind of sad to see loot like that in this when you can just simply buy it. But it's not like it's unnecessary. It's still shit you actually need. So that is a giant complaint for some low-level smithing stones. Holy shit. The player scaling is also confusing. FromSoft was clearly worried, especially with the DLC releasing so late after the base game, that players would enter with max levels characters and steamroll it. As a result, they put in an upgrade system where you must burn discoverable key items to boost your absorption and damage in DLC zones. However, this creates a really confusing feedback loop for the player. If I'm struggling to damage enemies, isn't my weapon? Should I be leveling? Have I not had enough DLC upgrades? If I walk into a boss arena and get 2-shot with 60 vigor and every defensive talisman I can equip, is there something wrong with the setup or do you just have enough DLC upgrades? The system they put in place makes it difficult to know if you're at the expected power level of an area or boss, since now there are multiple different upgrade levels that you have to work with. I think that's a pretty well-written, fair criticism. Basically, to simplify things, the roadblocks you had before in Elden Ring were your gear wasn't good enough, you didn't upgrade enough, your level wasn't high enough, you didn't have enough flask upgrades to heal more. Now your wall is, do I have enough Erdtree fragments? That's your new wall. It's as simple as that, really. I don't even think I need to go on more. If your build is maximized and you know it is, and you still feel like you're really not making any headway, just get more upgrade levels. If you get 4 or 5 or more of them, you're looking at 20% more damage. It's going to make a massive, massive difference in the fight. So just go explore more. That's simply the new wall that they put to give you an incentive to explore. But I understand the criticism for that, but I do think it's actually fine game design. Speaking of bosses, this might be your area of greatest disappointment. Your earlier statement about getting 2-shot with full defensive investment and 2 KHPs is not an exaggeration. These bosses do not mess around. That is still very, very true. More than the damage, however, is the design the point of the frustration. FromSoft has shifted hard bosses that constantly run away and forced to chase them in recent years, and there's plenty of that, but they've also dipped heavily into bosses that rush you down and almost never stop attacking. Your largest gripe here is not the difficulty of boss design like this, it's that it invalidates and prevents you from using all of the tools that the game gives you. Find a new weapon with some really cool combos? Cool, great. You'll never use them on a single boss like Mesmer. Best you can do is get a single hit before you're rolling for your life again. Find a cool new spell or incantation, you're going to get slapped out of the wind-up half the time, and the boss is programmed to immediately dodge the other half. Want to cast a spell or trade with a hit while the boss is attacking? Bad move, because you just did 1/30th of their health bar and just immediately killed you with a full combo. So I think what he's getting at here is, if you find a new incantation, let's say you find Elden Stars or something like that. You walk into the boss fight with Mesmer and you sit and you start casting Elden Stars while it's literally the Willem Dafoe looking up meme as he's charging his giant orb attack. He lands on you, you explode, you eat shit. This is true for most things in Elden Ring. There are a lot of super fancy things that you just simply don't ever get to use against bosses. But again, I don't see this as a knock against the DLC. This is just something that's been in the game. Like, if you're trying to do, Destined Death on, I don't know, Melania or something like that, she's not just going to stand there and let you do the flippies and then land in the shit. Like, it's just not going to work. A lot of the really cool weapon arts in this game are not meant to be used against the fast, agile bosses. They're meant to be used for, clearing smaller bosses or clearing rooms of enemies. Like, Wave of Gold is great for just obliterating an entire arena, but you typically don't want to use Wave of Gold when you're fighting Mesmer or something like that. He's likely just going to jump over it or dodge it to the side or something. There are things that are meant for bosses, and then there are things that are meant for field battles or even PvP, and that's okay. Now, there are certain things that, for bosses, are utterly terrible, but they have immense AoE clear that can completely shit on an entire zone of enemies. Now, there are things that are really good for bosses. There are things just like, I don't know, like an impaling thrust with a shard, or Alexander's shard, can do just 2,000 damage really quick, just a quick poke. It's not exciting, it's not fun, but that's the kind of quick move that's designed for a boss fight. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay that there are certain ashes designed for, boss scenarios. Certain things are designed for PvE clearing scenarios. Certain things are designed for big bosses that don't move. Certain things are designed for PvP. I think everything has their strengths and weaknesses, and I think that's okay. You shouldn't attribute the entire game to that level of stuff because it's just the thing you've got. Maybe you got Mesmer's Spear, and he's got a giant, 6-second long weapon art. Yeah, you're not going to be able to use that against Mesmer when you fight him again. That's fine. But I don't think that's really bad or good design. That's just how the game has sort of always worked. This brings things back to the Elden Ring summon system. There's a specific upgrade in the DLC for summons, as well as tools to heal your summons or buffed after they die. However, mainly what you found is that's been true in the base game for years. The bosses cannot handle summons. If you're struggling, just bring your favorite spirit summon and abolish this boss in a single try. This happens because the bosses are programmed to be extremely aggro and never stop attacking, but they can only deal damage to one enemy at a time. That is mostly true. Again, except the last boss, who still shits on your Mimic Tier if you want to try that. I will agree, though, with this whole aspect. The Spirit Ash summons are truly the game's easy mode. It actually is the game's easy mode. Not even if the Spirit Ash is, strong or anything like that, but it just simply gets the boss not aggroing on you for a second. And it also does not count as a co-op summon, so it doesn't increase the defenses of the boss. So you just have something that is just a complete upgrade. And again, on the last boss, after about 120 tries, I gave up and summoned a Mimic Tier. And then it still took me 30 more tries to actually beat the final boss. So it's good that there's a tool you can bust out when you find something too frustrating to win. And I'm not sure if they really built the game around you using spirit summons. I think for the average player, they kind of did. There's a whole upgrade mechanic for your health and defenses, and the other main upgrade mechanic is for your spirit summons, which kind of indicates they want you to use these spirit summons if you're playing solo. So that may be the case, and that it may be that people don't like that. But again, it's always been an optional difficulty selector that you can choose. If you're struggling so much because you don't normally use summons, maybe the game's hinting at you that you really should be using them for a lot of these. And then you might find out that the game is balanced towards that. Now, whether you agree or not that that's a good design, I don't know. That's up to you. But it seems that the DLC and Miyazaki himself are sort of indicating that based on the upgrade systems also affecting your Spirit Ashes. And I don't know, I think maybe it's time to stop being ashamed for it because the game is significantly harder to the point where maybe you might need that little bit of extra help. So this is by far the most fair review I've seen, but a lot of the things, I'm not saying this person is wrong or anything like that. They're just things I mostly disagree with. And if your main thing is that we just have disagreements, I'm fine. I just don't think a lot of these are actually as well written as this. Mostly it's just game too hard, game too hard, game too hard. I don't know how to play. My RTX is on, blah, blah, blah. So amidst the sea of bullshit, there is one or two actually well-written criticisms here, but none of this is deserving to be mixed or anything like that. And I have no doubt once people play through it more and more and guides show up where people learn, oh, this is a much easier way to fight this enemy, this is going to keep going up and up. This is mostly just initial frustrations with people not expecting FromSoft DLC difficulty and getting hit right in the face with it when it actually happens. So I understand that. It's frustrating, but this is the norm. This is how FromSoft DLC usually is, and I'm willing to bet in a couple of weeks we will see this change to positive again, but it's still pretty sad to see right now. Anyway, hopefully you learned a couple of things. There are things you can do to make your experience easier if you are struggling. For everyone else, I'm not going to say it. Thanks for watching.